Good morning. The trade wars and the tariffs are making contract law exciting again. Companies and their law firms are trying to figure out how to legally pass on the big cost increases that they're seeing. A retail company can simply pay the tariff and raise the price. But for companies with contracts, especially with the government, it's not simple at all. Howmet is a major supplier to Airbus and Boeing. And they did not waste any time in declaring force majeure in the face of suddenly higher costs and their inability to get components from their upstream suppliers. Force majeure is a legal technique that allows parties in a contract to void their obligations to perform if they're hit by external forces that are outside their control or their ability to predict them. That second part is the problem, as we'll see. In the case of Howmet, though, industry insiders understand that if it's successful, lots of other companies are going to be doing the same thing. The question is here, though. Given that Trump promised that higher tariffs were on the way, can companies really claim that the tariffs could not be foreseen? And so lawyers are busy carefully going through outstanding contracts to find escape clauses for their clients or to close them if they're working for a downstream company. The tariffs are resulting in significant and unforeseen cost increases and supply chain disruptions. But the fight is going to be on the contracts that were in effect before the new tariffs were announced. Even then, it's a problem. As we saw with COVID, just because damages to companies were significant and unforeseen, courts typically required companies to comply with what their contracts said. For the companies that have contracts with the government itself, attorneys conclude in all these pieces that it's a waste of time to even try to get out of them. Fixed price contracts are just what they sound like, and if the costs go up, it's very difficult to pass those on to the government. General Electric and Northrop Grumman are large Pentagon contractors and have already disclosed big hits to their profits. Smaller companies in the defense industry will struggle to survive, which will harm the entire sector. DoD supply chains will be weakened, the department's purchase power will be damaged, and the Senate wants to know if anyone at the Pentagon has worked out how much everything is going to cost now. Companies with cost-plus contracts are much better off, and the implication here in all this advice we're linking to is that a business executive is out of his mind to sign a fixed price contract with anyone, and especially with the federal government. That's because any change to the compensation structure of a fixed price contract needs to meet all three of these requirements in the FAR language involving federal taxes, which tariffs are. The first two are fairly straightforward and somewhat easily met. The third one is the problem. The increase in costs must result from a tariff that the contractor is directly required to pay. Most of the tariff costs are borne by others, like subcontractors, customs agents, wholesalers. They're usually the ones who pay the tariffs, and then they pass them down the supply chain. There is precedent in case law whereby contractors cannot recover price increases that are indirectly attributable to the tariffs, even if we all know that higher tariffs cause the prices to go up. What's more, in the case of a fixed price contract where the counterparty is a government, the sovereign Acts Doctrine says that contractors still need to perform their duties, and the government is not liable for their higher costs if those higher costs resulted from the government acting as a sovereign entity. Contractors sued for relief during COVID in a recent example where cost to do everything skyrocketed. The government told companies that employees weren't allowed to even go to work. Supply chains froze up and prices went crazy, but the government invoked the sovereign Acts Doctrine and the lawsuits went nowhere. The COVID pandemic set another precedent, which is that the United States is not liable for losses that come even after the contract was signed, which is based on another precedent, Deming versus the United States, which specifically involved tariffs that raise the cost of a supplier of rations to the Marine Corps. The company argued that they lost money because Congress raised tariffs on the supplies called for after the contract was signed. The court held again that the government was exercising sovereign power and dismissed the case. We must conclude again that no company should ever sign a fixed rate contract at all, and especially not with the government at any level. But Howmet's situation with Boeing and Airbus is a little bit different. Boeing is the prime contractor with the federal government, with thousands of subcontractors, including Howmet. This is Boeing's contract with its suppliers, and it specifically includes this language in 13B as a way out. Sellers are not liable for excess costs that arise from the acts of the government acting as a sovereign. Acts of God is 13A, acts of the government is B. Then come natural disasters and anything else that's beyond the control and without the negligence of the party suffering the loss. Boeing is likely in the same boat as Grumman and GE as the direct government contractor. But attorneys for their suppliers, like Howmet, are pointing to this clause and saying that the contract is specifically written to give them a way out when the prices of components or raw materials shoot up or they can't be found at all. The Harvard Business Review has some practical advice that a business manager might want to pay close attention to from now on. Force majeure needs to be written in every contract, and the contract language needs to explicitly say that tariffs and trade restrictions can trigger force majeure. Some pushback should be expected by counterparties, so they suggest putting a floor on what the tariff increase needs to be. HBR calls out Howmet again as a precedent-setting move for firms to emulate in how their contracts are written up. Suggestion 2, a price escalation clause that calls for the entire contract to be renegotiated if tariffs raise costs past a certain level. 3, allow for flexibility in sourcing if tariffs push up costs of products from one country but not from another, and suppliers can source elsewhere without penalty. 4, executives should constantly find new strategies, such as foreign trade zones, to protect themselves from sudden moves up and down in the tariff rates. Having their warehouse facilities in FTZs provides business executives more time and space to manage their tariff exposure and delay or negotiate down the higher costs from the tariffs. Advice number 5 was working until recently, probably not anymore, which is to nearshore supply chains to Canada or Mexico to reduce tariff exposure from Europe and Asia. Again, that's not likely to work given the tariffs we've got now on Canada and Mexico. Foreign trade zone bonded warehouses, contract attorneys with a specialization in force majeure. These guys used to get 5 incoming calls in a whole year, and now everyone wants to be their best friend. This is Wei Shan in Yunnan. Be good.
Thank you for making him my brother. Empower him. Fill him with your Holy Spirit. Give him gifts. Gifts of wisdom or of prophecy. Teach him to love. And make him a warrior in your name. Make him a great evangelist who will turn his co-workers and his family and his friends and his nation to Christ. Together we lift up